Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. My name is Joseph Sackor. I am a former refugee from Liberia, West Africa, an honorary delegate from Refugee Congress representing the state of Pennsylvania. And also, I am the founder of the Businesses for Refugees Pledge, an effort that was born right here at Concordia 1 year ago. So kudos to Concordia. This is where a lot of our great ideas are born. It is an honor to be here with you all once again. My fellow panelists and I are here today to talk about the Businesses for Refugees Pledge and what United States businesses, like many of yours here today, can do to support refugees at such a critical moment. We are thrilled to be joined today by Hans Howe, an asylee and a business leader. We are also joined by Abhinav Bahl of Uber to share more on the critical role the private sector can play in welcoming refugees, including the incredible work they are doing to support our new Afghan neighbors. Kate Olsen, Senior Vice President for Social Impact from Weber Shandwick, is here to talk to us about refugee inclusion and the importance of living your values in your work. And I'm also honored to be here today with my dear Businesses for Refugee colleagues, Noni of the 10 Partnership for Refugees and Chris Chancey for Employer Recruiting to share more on critical steps businesses large and small, medium, can take to welcome and integrate refugees. First, a little bit about the pledge. The Businesses for Refugees Pledge is a unique opportunity for businesses of all sizes, whether it is a mom and pop shop all across the country, regardless of the size, to unite and show support for refugees. This pledge shares the important message that American companies want to welcome refugees and that business leaders value our refugee neighbors. It is just that simple. We believe in a world where refugees are valued, welcomed, and included. We know refugees make our communities stronger and our industries more competitive. We recognize and appreciate the critical role of refugees and other vulnerable immigrants in contributing to our businesses, our communities, and our country. By signing on to those principles through this one-time pledge of support, businesses across the country are using their voices to join the growing chorus in the private sector that is showing support for displaced people. Amid the crisis in Afghanistan and unprecedented global need, this is now more critical than ever. Communities across the country right now are coming together to welcome our 65,000 new Afghan neighbors. Like all refugees, they are all bringing with them incredible skills, perspectives, and talents that make our communities, our economy, and our businesses stronger. In fact, 13% of refugees in the United States were entrepreneurs in 2015, with businesses that generated 4.6 billion United States dollars that year. 10% of resettled refugees are self-employed, compared to 9% of the local US population. Refugees are not only valuable employees, but are important job creators in our country. And about 70% of refugees in the United States are essential workers, many directly helping during the COVID crisis to save lives. Refugees who resettle in the United States are hardworking, resilient, and determined individuals who make their communities vibrant and strengthen their local economies. Businesses today are stepping up across the country to support, hire, and integrate refugees in innovative and inspiring ways. And the pledge community is here to help your businesses do that too. Businesses that sign the pledge have the option of taking their advocacy one step further through our incredible coalition of partners around the country, and around the world. We can offer you access to resources to design and implement projects to hire refugees, connect with other volunteer opportunities, support refugee inclusion, and promote dialogue on critical refugee issues. So more on that soon. Now, let's hear from our great panelists. Question for you, Hans How. Hans, you are an asylee and a business leader in impact investing. Why do you think refugee inclusion in the workforce so critical? And how do businesses benefit from supporting refugees?
Thanks for that question. As an asylee originally from Malaysia, I'm lucky to face many of the obstacles that many refugees and asylum seekers in this country have to face on a daily basis. It's not just about joining a workforce that is inclusive of their immigration status, but it starts at the point of the hiring process when refugees have gone through so much trauma on their way to the US, and then how are they able to translate that in a way that American businesses can understand, knowing that not all companies have the same policies and procedures in place to make sure that the environment is actually inclusive. And one thing I'll point out is that many refugees are often not just qualified, but overqualified for the jobs that they are doing for various reasons. Their academic credentials from their home countries may not be something that an American company be familiar with, or they might have founded their own businesses and be self-employed. And those are some things that at the workplace, whether it's at an interview stage, an interviewer might not be familiar with, or even after a refugee is employed, that the employer might not be familiar with, which is why I think it is important for American businesses to realize the value that refugees bring to the table. I think refugees embody many characteristics that American businesses value, right? Things like resilience, dependability, and determination. And these are transferable skill sets that I think employees should put emphasis on at the hiring stage, as well as when it comes to promoting employees who may be refugees within the ranks, to send a strong signal that American businesses value those traits and will look for those traits from all kinds of employees with very different life experiences, and that diversity really creates an environment that is great, not just for refugees themselves, but for the rest of the company.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's very important. Now let's go to one of our panelists again. This is for Abhinav Bahl of Uber. By the way, congratulations, Uber. I pledged $1 million to help arriving Afghan refugees and added Pastor and Diary, two of Afghan's major languages, to its driver app to help refugees get work. Well, Abhinav, tell us, why is supporting refugees important to Uber? And what more can companies like yours do to support refugee integration? What did you see that other companies have not seen yet to support refugees?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having us to speak about this important issue and highlight that businesses have a really important role to play here. And I'm happy to share the different ways that Uber is stepping up and what businesses can do to support the resettlement of refugees here. Why is this so important for Uber? Is a really good question. Very fundamentally, CEO of Uber, Dara, he fled the Iranian Afghan revolution when he was 9 and his family had to move here. So, apart from the very personal kind of connection that the leadership has to this issue, Uber as one of the largest platforms for independent work, there are a lot of drivers who are from refugee, asylee, as well as immigrant communities on our platform. And, it's important for Uber to do right by them. Similarly, in Afghanistan in particular, a lot of our Uber employees are former veterans who served alongside many Afghans who served in the conflict and supported the efforts there. Uber being an American company, it's extremely important for us to do our part to make sure that we're stepping up and are available to support the resettlement of refugees here in the United States. And so the way, Uber particularly is trying to tackle this particular issue is by essentially looking at what we do best and what we can bring to the table to be helpful here, right? So, we leverage our core capabilities and technologies to show up for communities in need, looking at how we can move people to where they need to be, or, where we can get things that people need via our mobility and delivery on freight platform. And how can we do this with nonprofits, that have deep ties and are working with communities that we're trying to reach. And in this case, refugees or asylees here. So we've done that in a lot of different areas. We've stepped up during the pandemic to provide free rights for vaccines, for example, showing up for communities that have been affected by disasters to provide, transportation or delivery to help them recover. And like similarly, as the crisis in Afghanistan was unfolding and the scale of it became clear, we started to think about what is it that we can do to step up and how can we be most helpful here. And to do that, we first had to understand really the resettlement journey that refugees take by speaking to experts in this area and see what are the different areas where we could plug in and be helpful. And we learned, that the most immediate need was access to transportation and essential supplies for Afghan families getting settled into their new communities. So as you pointed out, Joseph, we committed $1 million to frontline organizations to support Afghan resettlement efforts. And these include organizations like International Rescue Committee, New Lutheran Immigrant Refugee Services, No One Left Behind, Women for Afghan Women, Team Rubicon, Forward.us, by way of examples. And we provided them with in-kind ride and transportation credits to provide the vital transportation and help that they need, to get to the important appointments, interview, to travel, interviews for interviews for jobs, enroll their children in school, really that, the daily things that we all do to get settled in the communities. And so, we recognize that that's an immediate need. That's something that we can provide. And, we're stepping up to do that. And then, on top of this original commitment, we've also committed to matching up to $1 million raised via our app, via an in-app donation button for IRC's fundraising appeal for Afghan resettlement. And so, here we were looking at how can we really leverage the reach that we have as a platform to really be an ally for organizations on the front line of this effort, and how could we raise much needed resources for refugee resettlement efforts. And I'd encourage other companies to think through how their platforms or how their core capabilities can be leveraged really to scale up the support that's needed, to support this important effort. So, we have seen the numbers keep ticking up, and we're really pleased to see that. And really, we encourage other folks to go to the app and donate via this to really help organizations that are, working on this important effort. I think, another thing that we've learned is that, an important part of the resettlement journey is finding a path to the local workforce. So what is it that we can do to really extend economic opportunities, earning opportunities for refugees coming in? And for Uber in particular, because of its flexibility, we've seen that work on Uber has been a valuable option for immigrants and refugees. And that's because it provides the flexibility to fit work around making it to family medical appointments, settling children into school, taking classes, finding your feet really in an unfamiliar job market, and as you're trying to settle into communities, the flexible mode of work could be useful. So in order to make it easier for refugees to access economic opportunities, we're updating, as you pointed out, the Uber driver app, as well as our key support pages for Pashto and Dari. We're also launching a dedicated phone support for those languages as well. And then, of course, we're really pleased to be part of, this coalition, as well as TEN's coalition, to be, finding ways really in which we could, provide opportunities for refugees both within the company and across our platform. And so we're really honored to be supporting that effort. So really, to conclude, we've long believed that empowering movement, whether it's physical or economic or social, that changes the world for the better. And I think in particular, in demonstrating allyships for refugee and incoming asylees, we're really happy to do our part to support folks build a new life and a better future in their new homes.
Excellent. Changing the world for the better. I love that. Now, thank you so much, and thanks for all the incredible work Uber and the staff doing for our new Afghan neighbors and refugees in general. Now, let me go to our good friend, Kate Olsen from Weber Shandwick. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. You work with different companies around the world to make sure they are using their platform to create a better world. What happens when businesses lead with their values?
It's a great question, Joseph. Thank you for including me on the panel. I do work with lots of companies around the world who are navigating this new context of the role of business in society, and it's changing very quickly. And I think the issue of refugee inclusion is a key example of how businesses are looking at some of these emerging issues and the Sustainable Development Agenda in new ways, and understanding how they should be navigating and being part of the solution. We know from opening the paper every day that volatility and anxiety and a lot of these kind of tragic headlines are the new normal, and businesses are seeing huge implications from this context, because they're not only having to navigate a global pandemic and the public health and the supply chain and the economic implications of that, but they're also navigating all these new expectations that stakeholders have on them to lead with purpose and be driving solutions for the Sustainable Development Agenda. A lot of people call it the era of stakeholder capitalism, where companies need to be much more considerate of the needs of different factions, their employees, their customers, their supply chain partners, their communities, the planet itself. And in doing so, there's more scrutiny on businesses to lead with their values and really demonstrate consistency in how they're expressing those values through their commitments and their policies and their actions. And every day there's a story in the media about someone calling out a company for not showing that consistency. And so it's a very real reputational risk for companies these days to not be understanding how to be consistent and live those values first. And in order to do that, it requires a new form of leadership, one that, as you mentioned, is very purpose-driven and starts with those values. And the companies that are really getting credit for leading in that way, and that I would put Uber in that camp, are the ones that clearly articulate what they stand for and how they're intentionally operating to make an impact on their company, but also have a positive difference in society. And a big part of how they do that is through their culture and the signals that they put out in terms of how they think about people and how they're demonstrating their compassionate leadership and investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you so eloquently spoke about, and as Hans demonstrated, there's so much about the refugee community that can add to the diversity, equity, and inclusion of organizations and communities in and of themselves. And there's a lot of research that shows that improving your diversity, equity, and inclusion profile and performance leads to better outcomes for your company and your people, leads to better innovation, leads to stronger collaboration. There's so much, and I'm sure everyone else on this panel has a lot more data points to share on that front. But there's a really strong business case for including refugees in your talent and recruiting efforts, and thinking about including refugee perspectives in how you think about driving sustainable development solutions. But we know that some of these issues can be very hard for companies to grapple with. They're not easily and succinctly summarized. They're nuanced. There's different aspects of them that companies need to wrestle with. And so we work a lot with companies to understand how to think about corporate activism and standing up for issues like refugee inclusion, how to talk about it internally with your employees and lead from the inside out, but also to have a plan for when you would speak up externally and how you would do that and who you would empower to speak and who you would stand next to and which organizations, like many represented on this call, would be part of that standing in solidarity. And we're seeing companies step up for refugees. Uber is a great example. We've also seen big commitments from Walmart and Airbnb and some others. And I think what that points to is an opportunity for brands to be at the forefront of these complex conversations. And that's a key trend that we're seeing, where brands are really leaning into things that previously might have been deemed controversial, but are able to do so in a way that's authentic and true to the values and the role that they see themselves playing in the community and into society. And when they do that, they're connecting with the shared values of their customers. They're responding to activism internally and the expectations that employees have for how they can have purpose in their role and be proud of the company that they work for. And so whatever the motivation is for why a company leans into these issues and takes a stand, there's lots of research that also shows that the upside really outweighs the downside of taking a stand on these kinds of issues. And there's more to be gained than there is to be lost. And there's a lot of case studies and examples that we'll hear about on this panel about how you can specifically support refugees. And I just want to reiterate that no matter how you do, it's going to make a difference, and it's going to matter for your organization. It's going to matter for your communities. It's going to make a difference for society. It might be fraught and complicated to do so in the sort of fractured and polarized context in the United States today, but I still think the research bears out that there's upside. So I'll just close by reminding you of 3 key points that I think are helpful to frame this conversation and how you go back to your organizations and think about these kinds of issues and how to stand up for refugees. So there's new expectations and pressures on business to lead with purpose and consistent values. Leaning into diversity, equity, and inclusion is good for business, but it's also really good for society. And lastly, there's really only upside to speaking out and being smart and authentic in how you address corporate activism, especially when it's done in an authentic way and really aligned with your values. So I'll leave it there. I'm really happy to have been able to share some of the larger context around purpose and values-driven leadership. And I'm really looking forward to more examples of how businesses can get down to it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I mean, you have said it all. Diversity and equity. So that's what we said earlier, that these are things that our refugees bring. They bring incredible talents and skills. So by incorporating these skills into those organizations makes them stronger. Thank you so much. Now, question for you, my good friend Noni. The Talent Partnership for Refugees is a critical player in bringing big businesses together with refugees. At this critical moment, what are some of the steps larger businesses can take to contribute to welcoming our new Afghan neighbors?
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you so much for having us here today. I'm also really proud to have Uber on the panel with us, who are such a critical member of the Tent Partnership. Again, really pleased that you've asked this question, and we are thinking about it very deeply, particularly in the US context. As you said at the outset, we in the US, we're preparing to welcome about 65,000 Afghan refugees, many already here. But a couple of days ago, it might have even been yesterday, President Biden, there was an announcement from the White House saying that that the refugee cap will be lifted to 125,000 in the fiscal year 2022, making good on his campaign promise. So we are really going to be seeing, an exponential growth in the number of refugees that we're welcoming, and this is so critical. The way that we come at the issue is that we think that businesses can make the most important impact by thinking about how they can integrate refugees in their core business operations. And this is not to say that financial donations aren't important. They absolutely are. In times like now, when we're receiving refugees at bases across the US, and there are so many critical needs. We spoke to Save the Children just a few days ago, and they were telling us about how many diapers and hygiene products and food donations they're requiring right now to meet those needs. But in the longer term, what we have found is that jobs, giving a refugee a job, giving a refugee an opportunity is one of the most impactful ways to allow refugees to integrate into society much more quickly and effectively. I think that's for a number of reasons. I think first of all, often, refugees will arrive with, limited knowledge of English. I think with the case of Afghanistan is maybe a little bit different. We're also receiving many translators and interpreters who worked alongside the US military, but there will also be many people who are not fluent in English. And we find that, that first job can be so important in helping refugees learn the language to a good level. Network, and a job is such a good way to make friends and make a new family. And of course, there's the financial aspect of it. I think refugees, like all of us, want to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and give back to society and be able to support themselves and their families. And a job 100% allows them to do that. In answer to your question, Joseph, one of the things that we always recommend, and I think that all businesses can do, particularly right now, when we're at a time of so many labor shortages in a number of sectors, manufacturing, hospitality, construction, retail, it's really important to start thinking about refugees not as people who need a hand down, but also people that can make such a big contribution to our economy and our workforces.
Excellent. Now that is wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. Now, let me go to our friend Chris from Employer Recruiting. Chris, you and your partners at Employer Recruiting help connect small businesses across the country for refugee employees. Why do small businesses benefit from employing refugees? And what can small businesses do to support and empower refugees in their workforce and their communities?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Such a great question, because I think often it's easy for smaller companies to think that maybe they don't necessarily have a role to play, that this is left to the Ubers of the world to kind of make a difference. And for them, they may not have the capacity to be involved. And that's just not true. Just as we know that small businesses are the backbone of our economy across the country, we recognize that they have a vital role to play in employment and certainly for providing stability to the refugee workforce. So I think about 7 years ago, we started our business to place refugees into jobs. And over that time, we've helped place thousands of refugees into positions with hundreds of companies, and many of them being smaller companies. And so when we're describing a smaller company, we mean companies that with less than 1,000 employees. And so in some cases, that means we're placing one person, one former refugee into a job, and they're experiencing full-time employment here in the US for the first time. And then it may be hundreds of individuals we're placing in another company. But what we saw over the years is we saw patterns start to emerge of what it's like when a company says, hey, we want to try this out. We believe there's an opportunity here, both for our company and for us to serve our local community. And when an individual says, yeah, I'm willing to bring my talent to your company, no matter my background or what I've been through, I need stability, and this job can help me move forward and help my family move forward. When those two things kind of come together, there seems to be this pattern that we started to see emerge, where a company and an individual start to work together to really have an impact on the local economy. And so we wrote that pattern down in a book called Refugee Workforce that we released a couple years ago. And so I just want to highlight a few really practical things to answer your question, Joseph. What can a smaller company do? How do they go about the process of hiring refugees or immigrants into their company? We've heard a lot of stories from companies that say, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And they try it and immediately it doesn't work. And they'll say, oh man, that just didn't work for us. And in reality, there may be some things you got to change. There may be a few adjustments that you have to make on the front end, but if you're willing to make those adjustments in that initial investment, we really see a win-win for everybody involved. And so I'm just going to hit a few practical things that I think can be helpful for those that are on the call that might find themselves in a position of saying, man, we'd like to do this, but we're not really sure how to get started. So I'm just going to break it up really quickly. In our world, we talk about sourcing candidates, we talk about hiring, and we talk about retention. And those are three different problems for different companies. Right now in this day and age, it's really hard to find candidates. In some cases, it's really hard to get those candidates to show up and bring them on your team. And in some cases, how do we keep them engaged in the business? And so just really quickly on the sourcing side, the first step for a lot of companies is to even determine, are there refugees in your general area that you can engage with? Are there resettlement offices that you can partner with and volunteer with and support and potentially receive individuals from? So a good resource that we use often is a website called USA Hello. They have a map on their website, so you could type in the city that you work in or even your exact address to your business, and that map will pop up potential partners that might be in your area. So if nothing comes up, that doesn't mean that it's not possible for you to hire refugees, but it may require a little bit more of an effort on your part. Whereas for those who are in some of the mid-sized metros or larger metros where there's multiple resettlement offices in the area, it'll give you the information you need to contact them and reach out and say, hey, we'd like to hire refugees at our company. And when you do that, there's a few specific things. There's a few pieces of information you want to provide. And it's, we're all used to job descriptions and kind of going into depth, but really what the individuals that you want to bring on your team need to know is, what are the pay rates? What are the shift times that you're expecting them to work? What benefits are involved? And give us a short description of the job. Those four aspects are going to be really important. And I'll just a couple call outs. If you're looking at pay rates and you're thinking about how you compare we have a salary guide on our website that you can look at and kind of see the most common positions we're placing refugees in and what those pay rates typically are. And the other aspect is benefits. Often we think of 401ks, but in our world, the most important value is stability. So anything that's going to create greater stability, it might be a business card, it might be a company uniform, it might be a desk and a chair. I mean, it could be things that aren't necessarily a huge financial investment that can create a commitment, communicate a commitment from the company to the individual. The other huge thing in sourcing and finding great employees from the refugee community is offering some type of training, some type of on-the-job training or apprenticeship program is a huge value to our community. They have a growth mindset. They want to learn. And so if that's something that you can offer, even as a smaller company, it's a great way to engage the community. We have a separate organization. It's an investment firm. And we just launched a fund focused on providing flexible capital for companies that want to launch on-the-job training programs to hire refugees specifically from the Afghan community. And so would love to communicate, with anyone who's interested in using some financial resources to help launch a program like that. Two other points really quickly. When we start talking about hiring, just know that you may have to adjust some of the job requirements you have in place. Maybe you didn't even realize you have a requirement that someone needs a college education, but that may not necessarily be necessary for the job. So consider some of those adjustments that you might make that make it easier for refugees to step into a role. And then just know that we often say barriers when we think about language or transportation, but we want to say that those are hurdles. Those are things that can be overcome if we can put the right things in place. There's a lot of resources to support with language and with transportation. Those are always issues on the front end. We never see those being issues for a company or an individual replacing a job once they get into the role. And so I would encourage you to find ways around, navigate around some of those things that often come up on the front end. And then lastly, talking about retention, how can you invest in the community and the culture at your company? How can you provide ongoing training opportunities, and just create opportunities for your entire team to be educated on what you're doing? So I'll post a couple of links that I mentioned in the chat. So if anyone wants to follow up on those resources, but just grateful to know there are companies that are committing to this. Lastly, I think about one of our first hires on our internal team. Sana Hajizada is a refugee from Afghanistan, and he runs our payroll every week. And he often tells people who come into our office that USA stands for You Start Again. And though his intention is to communicate kind of a desire to kind of high motivation, get in there and work hard, and you can create a future for yourself, I'm grateful that there are opportunities for people to start again and find that stability that they're looking for.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. I know we have 10 minutes in and out to our closing, to the close of this program. Let me say this. There may be, I'm just going to give each of you probably 45 seconds to 50 seconds to give, give you a closing, kind of a closing remark, inspiring words for those institutions that are out there. Let's say, for instance, there are organizations that are a little bit reluctant to hire refugees, or, to put their names on the campaign that we have started, Businesses for Refugee Pledge. What can you tell those, institutions out there? What are some of the inspiring things that you need to tell them for them to understand, to encourage them that, hey, it's worth hiring refugees? Let's go. Let's go with your hand, the same order.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll just say this, beyond just, it is the right thing to do. As many on this panel mentioned, there is a strong business case to creating a diverse and inclusive work environment that is welcoming to people with different life experiences, including refugees. So beyond just, a more diverse team leads to more potential for innovation and growth. I think as someone who works in impact investing, I'm seeing an increasing push by investors, public and private, both stakeholders and shareholders, in demanding accountability from companies that they have a stake in. And it's no longer sufficient to stay on the sideline when there is a crisis that affects marginalized community. Investors expect companies to say something about it and respond to it, and not just make financial donations to charitable organizations, even though that's important. But it's no longer sufficient to do things like that and check the box and consider it something that the company has done and fulfilled to investors. Investors are demanding accountability, and that flows through to not just giving a public statement responding to a crisis, but making sure that your corporate policies, from hiring, talent retention, to how the business operates is actually inclusive of all communities, especially those who are marginalized, like refugees. So I would say that it's only a matter of time before your board of directors will start, asking those tough questions during your year-end reviews and meetings, and it's important that businesses get ahead of that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, 1 minute to Abhinav.
Sure, I'll be quick. I see it as a win-win. As has been mentioned earlier, there's a very strong business case for this. Right. There's a strong business case for diversity on new ideas, innovation, improving your product and services. There's a business case for investors demanding that companies step up and be good corporate citizens. So like I say, it's kind of win-win, and really the question to ask is, what have you got to lose? It can only be a positive.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes, I'll just give a +1 to Hans and Abhinav. I think those were both eloquently said. And I would add that if you're hesitant to make the decision and you don't quite know how to think about making a choice in this area, you already have all you need. You have your values. You have incredible people in your organization that are going to be champions for this, who understand how powerful it can be to bring new and inclusive perspectives and talent into the organization. So embrace those people in your organization that can help you be a champion for this and frame it in the way that will make sense to all of your stakeholders. But it is a win-win, as Abhinav said.
Great, win-win. I love that. And to your good friend Noni?
I'll add two more points that haven't yet been talked about in the business case, or a couple. The first is that we've carried out research that shows that refugee employees tend to stay longer with companies, so they bring down retention rates. So particularly for companies that have some issue or sectors that have issues with attrition, bringing in refugee talent can improve those attrition rates. So really important. And the second thing is that this is kind of more anecdotal, but we have seen that companies that hire refugees also see an improvement in overall employee engagement. So showing that other employees feel really energized and motivated to work for a company that is opening their doors to refugees. And I'll just finish by saying that we've at Tent, we work with about 180 major companies around the world. And we've never seen an outpouring of support like we have seen in the aftermath of the Afghan crisis. Just companies wanting to step up, particularly, many companies have veteran groups that are clamoring for their companies to do more, to support our Afghan allies. So yesterday we launched Tent's Coalition for Afghan Refugees. We've already got about 34 companies on board. Again, just to show how much appetite there is to really support for this group. So agree with what everyone else has said. And obviously we have fantastic partners like Chris at Amplio, who can make this process so seamless and give so much fantastic advice to companies as well on how to hire refugees successfully.
Great, thank you. And finally, to you, Grace.
I don't deserve the final word here. I think all of my colleagues, I think collectively what we're all saying is we can frame this as a social impact argument, that this is the right thing to do, and it is. But unfortunately, there are still people that we may not sway with that argument. And so when we communicate this is an economic argument, this will affect the bottom line of your company, retention rate reduces, overall employee engagement increases. I mean, we can continue to talk about not just what is qualitative data, but is now quantitative data. There's more and more research coming out that company after company is saying this has positively impacted our organization. And so we just try to talk about it from an economic standpoint. We feel like this is the best kept secret for the American economy, and it's no longer a secret. More and more companies are recognizing this is a powerful way to fill the roles that they so desperately need at their company and allow their company to move forward. And so I just echo what everyone's saying. This is an economic argument, and we're seeing the impact of that. And those courageous companies that are stepping out and willing to sign the pledge, and not just sign the pledge, right? Not just get some good PR, but actually take action and see this thing forward. They're the ones that are benefiting, and they're the ones that are going to have, long-lasting organizations that are going to continue to be strong companies in the marketplace. So grateful that we get to be a part of that and continue to push and see this become a main avenue of employment for companies around the country.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to our incredible panelists and to all of you with us today around the world. Thank you also to the partners who made the businesses for refugees' dream a reality. Concordia, Refugee Congress, the Refugee Advocacy Lab, We Hire Refugees, a New American Economy, Upwardly Global, Refugees International, Amplio Recruiting, Refugee Council USA, USA for UNHCR, 10 Partnership for Refugees, and the International Rescue Committee, among many, many others. You have until October 31st to join this growing community of businesses who are supporting refugees. Visit our website, businessesforrefugees.org, today to learn more and join today. Again, that's businessesforrefugees.org. On that note, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for providing your expertise on this topic, and for all the great things that you are doing to serve humanity. Again, like you said, it is an economic argument as well as a moral argument. Okay. Again, I want to say thank you so much to all of you, and be blessed. Again, thanks to Concordia for providing this platform to us. Thank you.